Yeah, so I would say, look, I said, even if you're planning on getting the epidural the minute you walk in the door, having a plan B is always a good idea. Welcome to the podcast. This is Tracy Donegan. Today I'm speaking with Henci Goer. Henci is an extraordinary researcher and a former doula. She's the author of several books, including the first of her new series, Taking Charge of Your Birth, Labor Pain. We talk about epidurals, the importance of doulas, as well as addressing the reasons why some hospitals are still resistant to the presence of doulas. And now I bring you Henci Goer. Hi, everybody. You're very welcome to my latest podcast episode. And I am so thrilled to invite such a wonderful special guest, Henci Goer, who I have followed since before my midwifery training, since I think right at the beginning of my doula work, I came across Henci's work, and I have been a firm follower, loyal follower since then. And I'm just very honored to have Henci on the show. And Henci and I had talked before we agreed to do the podcast about, how this would go, and how honored I am I think it's time that we collected all of these amazing voices of wisdom in the birth world, and I'm just thrilled that I can share some of Henci's wisdom with you today. So welcome, Henci. Thank you so much for the generosity of your time during quite a challenging season for you.
Thank you so much. I am so happy to be here, and we've known each other quite a while because you were living in the Bay Area for a while. So we've actually been face to face, and I'm hoping that I can be of help and value to your listeners.
Oh, I have absolutely no doubt. So I want to jump right into how did you find yourself in the birth world? Was it something that you aspired to do? Were you involved in medicine? What was your origin story, your pathway to birth today?
I became a doula because I wanted to be with other women, and that was all you had at that time was the Klaus and Cannell studies, and the awareness that one-on-one labor support was valuable. And when I started teaching Lamaze classes, I realized that what my students were hearing were just, like, well, we have to use electronic fetal monitoring all the time. You wouldn't want to do that. That would be like driving down the wrong side of the road at 90 miles an hour. You want to take care of your baby, right? And so I got interested in writing and connected with Penny Simkin, who had Penny Press at that time, which is a series of pamphlets, and started writing for her. And then the first thing I wrote was published in, when was it published? 1990? It was Obstetric Myths versus Research Realities, where I published the book that I wanted to have on my bookshelf and it didn't exist, which was information from the research. And that's the niche that I've been in ever since. My next book was The Thinking Woman's Guide to a Better Birth, which became kind of the Princess Bride of birth books. It was kind of the one that you would find it and then tell your friends. And because there, my second thought was, well, so I've written this book that's for childbirth educators, but pregnant women and birthing people need this as well. And that's when I wrote The Thinking Woman's Guide. I was fortunate to find a publisher. And then the third book I wrote was jointly authored by a nurse midwife. And again, that book is more for professionals. So my life became, and my passion became, I actually got out of doula work and being an educator. There are people who can do that better than I can. I mean, I was an okay one, but it's not, I think I'm too cerebral for that work, but I found this niche of reading, analyzing, and synthesizing the medical research and kind of bringing that forward to people who could use it, whether they might be directly to pregnant women and birthing people, and or to birth professionals who would find it helpful to have that in-depth information.
If I could interrupt you just for a moment, because I think
For
it'll be,
sure.
I know we're going to have lots of, I do want to talk about your new book, but just something that struck me there when you're talking about when you were working as a doula, because I know there'll be lots of doulas that will be watching this episode. Can I just ask you about your experience back then being a doula? Like, how were you received? What was the kind of, or was this just in the birth center, or were you in Stanford or in some of the local hospitals as well?
No, I was in all of the hospitals, and when I started doing this, they didn't know what doulas were, and we kept kind of a low profile. For all they knew, we were just a friend.
Mm.
But I knew, and was proved correct, that when they figured out there are two problems with doulas from the medical system's point of view. One is that they're observers. They are present in that room, and they see what actually happens in that system. And the other thing is that they are potential disruptors by giving the mother. I mean, I don't think a doula should ever be in the position of telling a mother what to do, even based on what they know. But I did see the role as, barring an emergency, slowing down decision-making. And that, from the medical system's point of view, is an intrusion on what they think is absolutely their right. Because it's an interesting point of language, but the whole medical system talks about informed consent. It doesn't talk about informed decision-making. There's a big difference, and I think every doula out there is nodding, just like you are. The other thing is, there's a new thing now, shared decision-making.
Oh, yeah.
But what that leaves out is, shared decision-making means you and I will have a conversation, and I'll go along with it if I agree what you want. So shared decision-making is another one of those, listen to the words. They mean something. So as time went on, and I actually had a couple of really difficult incidents where I'll tell you about one of them, where I actually was called into the hospital for a good talking to, which was, I was with a mom.
I've had those.
Who was having quite a long labor, and got to the birth, and I knew she did not want an episiotomy, and I saw the doctor kind of hide the scissors, and she was in the lithotomy position on a delivery table, hide the scissors under his whatever it was he was wearing, and all I said to her was, you know that Dr. So-and-so is getting ready to do an episiotomy. Is that okay with you? And they threw me out of the room. So I think it's gotten increasingly difficult. I actually did leave being a doula because it was difficult for me emotionally. I was in the situation where the mom was okay with what was going on, because she didn't know anything different. But I knew how she ought to be treated, and to have to stand by and watch people not be treated in the way that they should, or be given what I knew to be misinformation. Oh, the epidural won't slow down your labor. It might actually help by relaxing you. I had to get out, because that's not a good situation when everybody's okay and you're the one that's not okay.
Yeah.
Fortunately, at that time, I'd gotten into writing, and I felt like I have a transition where I can carry on with something that does not put me in these confrontational situations. If all I was doing was home and birth center births, it would have been wonderful. The thing about the birth center, it was so respectful. It was like everybody has their sphere of expertise. That was a birth center, so it wasn't run by midwives. So it had physicians, midwives, who had privileges there. And the director was the same obstetrician who was my obstetrician. He was the director of but it was run by a community board where there were the doctors and midwives were on the board, but so were we.
Right.
And at a difficult birth, I'd have the family doc who was attending say, we've tried getting her up and walking around. Henci, do you have any ideas? Because there was that respect for what a doula might know that a physician wouldn't.
Yeah.
But I really honor all of those doulas who are in the trenches with their laboring clients and are able to navigate that and be supportive of their clients' process. I know
sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, what I would do at the postpartum visit was at least explore. It was like, so how was that birth? What do you feel went well? Were there any things that you feel like, I might have done something differently? Or, I'd kind of like open that door. Because one thing, I don't know if Dona is still doing it anymore, but a problem I had was with the idea of it's the mother's experience. You need to support the mother wherever they are. And I think, yes, that's true. You don't want to, but to be silent can also be like, you were okay with what happened. So at least to open that door and explore with afterwards, I think I did see as an appropriate role for a doula.
Hey there, if you're enjoying this conversation and are passionate about women's health and wellness, the best way to support our work is to subscribe and share this episode with other amazing women in your life. Your support means the world to us and helps us reach more women with empowering content. So go ahead, hit that subscribe button and spread the love.
Yeah, and I'm just, and your experience, and I'm sure there's many birth professionals nodding along with your experience. And I think it's one of the reasons why so many doulas come into the profession, first of all, because their own experiences, but I don't think they anticipate the level of misalignment between birth physiology and the environment. And I think so many are, I think it was a big part of what I was a trainer for Dona for many years. And part of my training was always the emotional regulation skills for doulas, because we can teach doulas how to do the double hip squeeze. We can teach them all of the kind of various pieces. But if they can't regulate their own emotions when they're in a confrontational experience, and they will face it, they're burning out so quickly. And we have the new doulas coming in. And then if they don't have that as part of their training, how to work within different difficult circumstances, how to be aware of the energy in the room, and really it's what I call brain training, to be able to train yourself into awareness of what's happening in the room and looking for the meaning as well beneath the words, not taking it personally. And because what I find is, if there's a decision to be made during labor, and it's not an emergency, but maybe we're discussing whether Pitocin is relevant or necessary, to understanding what the parents' wishes are, understanding kind of where the medical community are coming from, to be able to walk that fine line of taking everybody's input on board and being able to support the mother in her understanding of the information that she's being given, but also being able to, when we are stressed, and birth is stressful for doulas as well, especially if you're in a kind of combative environment, to be able to ground yourself and turn off that amygdala that's firing up. Because if a doula is in the fight or flight state, the doula herself cannot take in the information and share that with her client in a way that she can do if she is herself in a more focused, grounded state, when she has actually access to the neocortex. Because otherwise, if the doula can't moderate or regulate her own emotional state, then she's useless to mom when it comes to big decision making. Because we talk about, doulas will be well aware of, the BRAIN acronym, that framework we use. So B for benefits, risks, and when can we use that as a tool for decision making in labor. But again, if the doula is in that fight or flight stress mode, and mom is likely to be in that same mode of stress, then before we can even use that
the
tool,
partner or others in the room who are even more triggered, and the partner is very liable to being co-opted.
Oh, totally. Yes.
Yeah.
So the doula, before we can even use that framework, when I'm talking to doulas, I always say you have to be able to calm your own brain before you can use that tool, so
Yeah.
that you can be receptive to the information and actually make rational decisions. Because when that neocortex is offline, when we're in that fight or flight, we just can't make decisions that will be supportive of our, I guess, our birthing goals, or whatever goals we had in mind, or our intentions for that birth.
Yeah.
But let's move on to your new book. Tell me
I
about
want to add
your
to
new
that.
book.
I think,
Yes.
and this is something that just temperamentally was, especially years ago, I'm not sure I could do it now, but I think when you say emotional regulation, I would add that the doula has to hold a place of compassion for those doctors and nurses that they're engaged with, not in the sense of what they're doing is okay, but I think you started to say it, and I really want to bring that out. Your best hope of keeping real confrontation that lose-lose, because any confrontation around the laboring woman is not a good idea, is if you can hold at the same time what is propelling them into the positions they're holding and have compassion for that. It's not a guarantee, but you have a much better chance of speaking human to human and lowering the temperature in the room. And I can give one experience where I managed to achieve that. Was a woman, a client who actually had high blood pressure, and there was like, I don't know, maybe she was GBS positive, and they wanted to make, she was in labor, and they wanted to make sure she got her IV, and the nurse was like, just like in that, oh, here's somebody else, and I'm busy, and and I think, I don't know what Angel is like. I guess maybe I was rubbing her feet or something, and I caught the affect of the nurse, and I said, you're looking kind of tired and stressed. Can I rub your shoulders? Would that be okay? And she was like, that is not my long suit, but in that moment, at least, I was able to pick up on and behave instinctually. So it does, as I said, it's not a guarantee that everything will be rosy, but it puts you in a position where you're not being triggered.
Yeah. And I think these days as well, because of birth has become so over medicalized, and we know that the hospital is not the best place to have a physiological birth if you're healthy and well and your baby is healthy and well. But I think when I guess if we can support doulas to find that place in the room where they can see the other human in the room and not the enemy. It's not because there is this them and us. And I think when we can actually, and when I'm talking about brain training, I'm talking about mindfulness skills and compassion training as well, is to be able to use these different brain circuits to be able to calm our own response and see clearly what's happening in the room, not see it through a filter of my stress and what I think should be happening in the room. But to be able to see that nurse or that obstetrician as, a human being having a difficult experience too. So how can we work with that and bring out the best of everybody in the room without causing that as you said, the temperature to go up? It's a tightrope I think we walk. But I do think, and I know I go back to it, is that I think doulas need so many skills and understanding of the evidence, but I think their own self-care of having a mindfulness practice or a self-compassion practice for during those moments and for after the birth, because as you know, you come away from it and second guessing and blaming and to be able to sit with those emotions and not have them drive you out of this work.
Apropos of that, I think it's crucial for doulas to form circles and groups and partnerships where they can talk to each other. First of all, during a labor to get other ideas, but afterwards to debrief with each other, and in a situation of perfect trust and no judgment, where just for that very reason, this is really hard work to do alone.
Yes, it is. But yeah, please tell me about your new book.
Okay,
Pain.
where was I when we?
Let's
Look,
move from
squirrels!
emotional
Went
pain,
off into the.
emotional pain to physical pain.
So I
Well,
had
what
the bright
inspired you to
idea.
write a book about pain? Yeah, go for it.
Oh, okay. Well, it's the first of a series. Okay. So where did we leave our heroine? I decided after the Optimal Care in Childbirth, the book that was primarily for midwives and people like that, that I wanted to go back to more doulas and pregnant people. So I decided, well, the modern thing was to do lectures online, and that's when I started Childbirth U. And Childbirth U just never went anywhere. And eventually, I had a marketing person that said we need to do a focus group. So she put together a focus group, and one of the questions I had her ask was, do you think this material would be better in a book? And they said yes. They said it wasn't very accessible. And then I was like, okay, okay, little side trip. My daughter makes her living as an audiobook narrator. She is a professional actress, SAG-AFTRA, yay her. And she was wanting to start a small press. She's very entrepreneurial. By the way, her name is Henci Goer, same last name. So if you're interested in audiobooks, you can look her up on Audible and see if there's anything that she's narrated that you like.
Great.
And she wanted to have a kind of like for sort of boutique books that wouldn't get published, but she thought they could be profitable, and then she also would get to narrate them. And so I was the first book of that. And she had also been a tutor when she was working in trying to make it in Los Angeles, in Hollywood. And she's a very good coach. And we started talking about what was the problem with Childbirth U. And the problem was that the model for it was more like a TED Talk. I'm going to stand up in front of you, and I'm going to tell you what I know in hopefully a clear and understandable way. And we realized that was not the voice that we wanted, because now I really wanted to write a book for pregnant women and people that would help them make decisions. And we did a lot of talking, and I knew that, I wasn't, I'm blanking on her name. It's like I wasn't the girlfriend to say, hey, I went through pregnancy and I read some stuff and now I can tell you stuff. It's like, no, not me. And I didn't want the TED Talk. And what we finally got to was, the voice I wanted was, we're sitting down together. We both have our cups of tea. And I want you to make the decision that's right for you. I have to be the elder, the wise woman. I've got the years to do that. I have no judgment. I don't know what's right for you. I know that you're an adult, and if you have that information, you'll be able to, and I'll also be able to tell you, once you have that information, what are your best ways of getting what you want. Because what you don't know is how the system works. So I can give you strategies about that and create that safe space where I can do that. And I worked very hard. And what the idea was, I was going to take the individual lectures and convert them into books. So one of the lectures is on pain management. And that's what I've done with that book. And it is the first of the Take Charge of Your Birth series. So they're small books. They're not very expensive. And they go in depth on a particular topic. And we've leveled the information so that you can get the information that you want to make your decision. But many of the chapters have taking a deeper dive, which will go into maybe details of the research that you may or may not care about. But my point is, I'm going to lay it out for you. Now, there are two concepts that are really important to me. One is transparency. There is this idea that, you can be neutral on these topics. You can't. Everybody's got an opinion. So the best I can do for you is to be transparent about that, tell you what I think, why I think it, and that leaves you in a space where you can say, yeah, I agree with that. Yeah. Or, yeah, I hear what you're saying, but no. But if I'm pretending to be neutral, I'm really leading you up the garden path because people aren't neutral on these topics. Second book in the series, about 3/4 of the way through the manuscript, and that one's going to be an introduction. I don't know where we'll go with number 3, but don't make plans that far ahead. So I'm hoping to provide these chunks that go deep, as well as they're not wide.
What would would you recommend this book for a first-time mom, someone who's had a previous birth experience and wants to maybe do things a little differently this time? Or?
Well, I'm primarily writing for the first-time mother, and also for people who have had a birth and were like, oh, that didn't work out so well. I made the best decisions I could at the time, but I want to do something different this time, or I might, but I want to know more about it. And I will say in this book, it isn't just talk. When you get to the end of the book, then there's your takeaway, which gives you the information in the book. And I basically take the reader along 2 paths. The one is that you've decided to plan an epidural. And the other is you've decided to try and avoid an epidural. And I give information on both of those. And I also recommend that even if you've made that choice, read the other half. And here's why. Because you may plan not to have an epidural, but you don't get to decide what kind of labor you get. So it would be good for you to know about ways of having an epidural that might minimize the chance of having one of its adverse effects. On the other hand, you may be planning to have your epidural, but there's almost bound to be some point at which it would be really helpful if you knew strategies to deal with contractions other than pain meds. It might be while you're still at home. It might be in early labor at the hospital. I will recommend that you delay an epidural. What are you going to do in the meantime? It might be the anesthesiologist isn't available. It might even be they work so well for you, you find you didn't really need the epidural, and that's a great way of avoiding its adverse effects. So I do try and meet everybody's needs.
Yeah, that's so interesting. When in the past, when I've been teaching hospital-based classes, and we'll usually start off in the morning with non-pharmacological pain management, and I'll always preface to the class, because sometimes I can see the shutters come down because someone has already decided that, oh, I'm getting the epidural, so this is not for me. I don't need to be aware of this, But I'm always like, as you said, there's times when there may be a delay in the anesthesiologist getting to you, or it's too early to have or you're in the car and you don't have an epidural in the car. How are you managing
and
until
sometimes
you actually
they don't
get
work. I mean, they try, but
Exactly.
sometimes you've got a window, or it doesn't take on one side, and it's not high, but what are you going to do then?
Yeah, so I would say, look, I said, even if you're planning on getting the epidural the minute you walk in the door, having a plan B is always a good idea. And just interesting, I've had experiences with working with moms who had a very long labor, malpositioned baby, and epidural did leave a window. And we were chatting with some of the nurses, and we used the TENS machine on the window with really good effect.
That's
Mom
brilliant.
used it herself.
Whose idea was that? Was it yours or the nurses?
But No, it was mine, but we made sure we had a conversation with the nurses. What were their thoughts on it? And they were familiar with TENS machines, so they thought, well,
Yeah.
let's try it. And as long as mom is controlling it, great. And it just gave her that little bit of distraction, and there was still pain there, but not to the level that she had been experiencing. And they had tried
Mhm.
resighting and changing position, but that window was just not going anywhere. So just a tip for someone who might be listening that
I think one of the things is you just put your finger on it. It's not for many laboring women and birthing people. It's not about being totally out of pain. It's about getting the pain to a level that feels manageable. And if you can accomplish that, again, in the medical model, their thought is we have two goals for you. One is we want you to be healthy, we want you to deliver a healthy baby. Second goal is we want to relieve your pain. So that model doesn't really take into account of there's a broader spectrum. I mean, one of the things you'll read about in the book, and there's research on this, is what makes for a satisfying birth experience is not how much pain relief you get. It rides on things like feeling supported and respected by the people around you and treated kindly. It very much rides on feeling that you have agency and can make decisions. Pain only comes into it when, first of all, if you're not getting those things, then you're much more wanting, the pain becomes much more unmanageable. But pain management comes into it when your expectations aren't being met. If you want that epidural and then you can't get it, then you're not going to be happy after that birth.
Yeah, and then we have pain, and then we have suffering, which again because if you're not being cared for and your expectations haven't been met, then you're in the not only a physical but an emotional state of suffering, which of course amplifies the pain signals even more.
Yeah, I think doulas have a very strong role to play, whether the mother is planning on having an epidural and has one, or whether the mother is not planning on having an epidural. Regardless of whether they have one or not, the doula has a role to play in that, creating that supportive emotional environment.
Henci, can I ask you, when over the years, as you've been studying various pain management and all of the different pharmacological options that we have, what as you speak to other women as well, like what have you found has been like the biggest, I guess, misconception about epidurals in labor?
Wow.
Because I still get asked if people can get home, if you can have an epidural at a home birth, or is there, and questions about walking epidurals, which of course is different, but is there, do you feel like there's still not a really great understanding, or the fact that the drugs and the epidural do pass through the system? What's your take on that?
I'm not actually talking to pregnant women and people. So that's one of the things I actually feel is a lack, is that because I'm not doing doula work and I'm not teaching, I'm sort of not in the trenches, as it were.
Henci, just going in your research with looking at pharmacological pain relief, what are you, what have you come across that, I guess, assumptions that a lot of people will make about epidurals and their safety? And
yeah, I think that people don't understand the extent to which this is a big deal. You have to have an IV. There are side effects, some of them quite serious. They do slow labor, and then you have to give Pitocin to get the labor back going again. It limits some of your other options about being up and around. There is a huge controversy where it is firmly believed in the medical field that it does not increase your odds of cesarean, and I have a whole section in the book where I take that research apart. I think it is possible to have an epidural under circumstances where it doesn't, and one of the reasons that you don't see a difference in the research is because you're so likely to have a cesarean anyway in our culture that the epidural doesn't add that much to the risk because you're already in bed on a fetal monitor with an IV and not allowed to have eating or drinking and on a timeline for how fast you need to make progress. I think, as you started to say, there isn't the understanding that between pain and suffering, in the sense that you can be completely free of pain, but if you're also feeling nauseous, which can happen with an epidural, or you're having trouble breathing, which can happen with a spinal epidural, or they're now not looking, they're kind of looking not happy with the fetal monitor tracing because it has dropped your blood pressure and the baby's heart rate as a result. And you can be quite worried and uncomfortable and still be out of pain. Oh, the other thing that happens, and I think this is important, is that once you have the epidural, people ignore you. Your partner is like, hey, she's out of pain. Okay, let me get my phone out.
Definitely changes energy in the room.
The energy, thank you, that's a better word for it. The energy changes in the room, but you still have a woman in labor, the most amazing and crucial event happening in her life. And now she's an observer instead of a participant. And that's a big change in the experience as well. And I think all of those need to be taken into account in making that decision around what you want, what kind of experience you want. And certainly I am not saying that, number one, that there are people who will say, I understand all of that and I want to experience as little pain as possible. Got it. But now you have the information, so you're making an informed choice. And I certainly have been at births where the epidural has been like anything else in terms of like, it's time to do something other than just sort of DIY strategies.
Yeah.
And
I think, my kind of over the years, I think, as a new doula, I think I was probably quite evangelical against epidurals. And I think that's quite common in new passionate doulas who might have, now have new information about their own birth experiences and be like, now the rest of the world needs to know all of this. And I think we've adopted the meaning to the epidural. And so my approach with parents is the epidural is, even if you're planning on is last thing on the planet you want, I always say, keep everything on the table. And see it as another tool in your toolkit. But you have this massive toolkit with all of the other DIY and other options for you, and the epidural being part of that toolkit. But when I've said that, sometimes I've really been demonized for saying that. As a midwife, you're saying, I'm not saying like epidurals are okay. I'm saying they are. It doesn't have any. I have no skin in the game. So if someone has an epidural, I'm like, you have your epidural. And it's the way you would say, it's like, I present you with the information and then you will decide based on what's happening during your labor on the day. But I think we have to get to a point to see an epidural as it's a tool in the toolkit, but it does have some extra special pros and cons that are worth looking into, even if you plan never, and you're going to a birth center or you're planning a home birth. Because I think once we start removing and taking things off the table, then we're limiting our options. And even if it's just a mental game of, I can have an epidural if I really need one, or if something is happening in this labor, it's been really long and difficult. And but I just think we need to move away from demonizing the epidural. But I think so many new doulas are still at that point where epidurals are just bad, and they've attached that meaning to it instead of. And I think parents moms are, because of the presence of oxytocin, and all of these beautiful pregnancy hormones, they are aware of micro expressions. So if somebody's telling them, one thing, but their, micro expressions on their face are saying something else, it's creating that dissonance within the mom herself, that something isn't registering, or this is a personal belief. So I think for doulas to, first of all, read your book, because it's so balanced when it comes
Thank
to
you.
the different. It is really, it's very hard to find that balance of, I'm here to present you with a smorgasbord of options, and you will do with it what you want. I think sometimes we have, birth professionals that want, I had a great birth, so I want to make sure you have a great birth, or I had a really bad birth and I want to make sure you don't have that
Yeah.
same birth. Instead of really being able to stand back and say, here are all the tools, some work better than others, let's try them all. And if at the end of the day the epidural still makes sense, then I feel like, mom will use that epidural, and she won't carry a sense of guilt that she gave in, because there's that feeling of, I gave in to the epidural, or I think it's like, but you've used all of these other tools in your toolkit. I think, yeah, if you get to a point where it makes sense, then it absolutely makes sense. But I have to say, your book really presents the information in such an accessible way. I think
Thank you.
for somebody who hasn't got medical training, and I think doulas will find it really insightful. And I usually say to doulas, lend these to your clients. Don't lend them to your clients. Have them go to NC's website or Amazon and buy the book. And support NC so she can write more great books.
So earlier, we talked about, for the woman or birthing person who's planning an epidural, that they would be wise to also have the DIY strategies, because there's a fair probability at some point they'll need them. So don't write them off your dance card. Here's a concept for the woman or birthing person who wants to avoid an epidural that I use in the book, which is the difference between having a goal and an intention. If you have a goal, if you don't achieve it, you feel like you failed. So if it's your goal to say, I don't care, I am not having an epidural, you don't get to determine what your labor is going to be like. You can do your best, but you don't get to determine that. Having an intention says, this is the direction I want to go in. At least that helps you figure out what your priorities are if you're being pushed off that path as to what you want to do. That puts you much more in charge.
It's very similar to the idea of the birth plan, which is like the goal, and birth preferences or birth intentions.
I think having a plan is good. It's how you define the word plan. To say preferences means I think I'd rather have chocolate ice cream today rather than vanilla. I think that undercuts. But a plan, it's not a shopping list with checkoffs. And that's, again, the way the medical system wants to frame it. A plan is a way of figuring out what's important to you and then aligning what you want to do that lines up with what's important to you. But it's the same thing as planning a vacation. Things come up that push you in a different direction, but you still have the priorities of making decisions around what the original intention was.
Yes. Yeah, because it is interesting when you talk about birth plans and people get quite, you can't plan for labor, and it's it's the nuanced interpretation.
That's a trap that the medical system puts us into, is this idea of we define what a plan is. No, they don't understand what a plan is. They interpret it that way.
Yeah, and not all providers are welcoming of anyone having any kind of intentions, or it's because the medical model focuses on healthy mom, healthy baby, and that's it. That's the
Well, and underneath that is the feeling that they have to be in control of the process. I mean, that is really the underpinning of the whole medical model, which is, if I'm doing things to you, I am controlling what happens. I'm stopping that baby from being too big by inducing you. I mean, whatever it might be, if they're watching something unfold, then they're not in control of it. And what feels comfortable is being in control. And I don't want to label, I want to be careful here too, because there are some wonderful, supportive obstetricians.
Yes.
And also, there are a fair number of midwives who are also in the control model. So you've got to choose a practitioner based on what you find out about them, not on the label that's on their name tag.
Yeah, or the not Yelp review, but that we can look at providers' reviews.
Yeah.
And see, before we wrap up, so this series of books that you're working on, taking charge of your birth, that phrase, taking charge of your birth, is a little bit of a disruptive phase for a lot of women to consider, because I think, I'll just say from my own experience, as when I was a first time mom getting ready to have my baby, I'm thinking, I don't want to control anything. I don't know anything about birth. You control it. Let me abdicate everything to you.
I don't say take control of your birth. I make that point. I say take charge. That's very different from being in control. Taking charge means you are making a considered series of decisions and you know what you want. You can't control the birth. We're both in agreement about that. And you can't control how other people are going to act towards you, but you can take charge.
But even I'll play a little devil's advocate here. So, but taking charge means really, well, to me, taking charge means the buck stops with me. So I'm taking charge. I'm being intentional about the information that I'm gathering. I'm intentional about my care provider. I'm intentional about my choice of place of birth. I'm intentional about stacking the odds in my favor of breastfeeding going really well. Do you think that's the reality for most first-time moms, or does it take a birth experience that might not have been absolutely amazing for that second experience for moms to say, hang on a minute, I need to take charge this time? Because when I went with the flow the last time with, go with, you always hear that saying, I'm just going to go with the flow, but not understanding that the flow means the institution's flow rather than one that you've kind of intentionally set. Am I making sense? I just feel like
I think you're.
Is it more of a second time mom experience to take charge? Because the first time there's so much fear, especially for first time moms, that we don't know enough, and everyone out there is the expert, and that we almost take a back seat. I took a back seat to my care, and I think how do we help moms avoid that first abdication of, I don't know enough, so I'm just going to let them decide the first go around, and I won't have a home birth the first go around just in case? And
well, I think we've sort of talked about it, which is taking charge does mean figuring out what kind of birth you want, not the kind that your sister had or your best friend, but what's important to you, regardless of whether that's where the herd is going. I mean, I'd be speaking to, in most cases, I would be speaking to the person who wants to avoid an epidural. Now I've given you the information. If that's what you want to do, here's how you need to set things up. Choose your care provider, hire a doula, yada, yada, think if you don't have any reasons not to, think about it out of hospital and why that's important. So I think absolutely it's for the first birth in terms of taking charge, because it puts you in a position of dealing with that fear. I mean, the old-fashioned reason to take Lamaze classes was to be able to cope and not feel like, I don't know what I'm doing, So it's that feeling of coming into it saying, I know stuff and I know what I want, and I'll work with you, set things up. Again, it's like planning a vacation. So, you have your vacation time coming up. You're going to let someone else decide whether it's going to be to the beach or the mountains or to visit your mom. No, you're going to make those choices and feel good about them. Now, I would say that you've made some decisions and you took that first vacation and maybe you missed your plane because you didn't time getting to the airport right. And it's like, next time, not going to do that, So obviously you're going to learn. But I think coming from a position of agency where you do know enough. Now, I will say it is perfectly legitimate to say, you know what? I don't know anything about this stuff. I just want to find a care provider that I feel good about, and I'm going to let them make the decisions. You just took charge because you just made a conscious decision about what was right for you. Now, you might go through that birth and come out of it saying, no, next time I'm going to make some different choices about what happened to me. Or, yeah, they were real friendly in the office, but it wasn't so great when they, did whatever at the labor. You learned something. I'll tell you something that I got from my daughter from her acting classes, her acting instructor. And when he'd have them, do a scene, because of course all actors are like, that's their whole selves. It's like, oh, I really sucked at that, or oh, that was fabulous. He said, you want to get in the space where, and this applies to the people I'm talking to now, or afterwards, you think about what went well, what didn't go well, what would I do differently next time? And then I would add to that, what would I do the same next time? So that puts you out of the judgment field where,
Yes.
oh, I screwed up, or oh, I failed because it just puts you in that space where you can make, again, it's taking charge, but not taking control. It's having intentions, not having goals.
Yeah. No, I see that. It's, and I like those, asking those questions, because asking those questions after the birth experience, and being able to ask those questions, and it's a compassionate way of asking those questions, and it's being compassionate to yourself instead of, because again, we tend to be, as new moms, trying to do mothering right, well, what we define as right or perfect, and we internalize the whole fight or flight experience as when we're new moms as self-attacking and self-criticism. And so if we've had a birth experience that maybe didn't go as we had intended it to go, to really to offer ourselves some self-compassion around that experience, and be kind to ourselves for what we didn't know.
Suggestion for that too that I've gotten from, I don't know if you've ever heard of focusing. It's a technique that sort of links your head and your body when you're in a sort of mindfulness space. And when that self-critic is running, you want to say to yourself, something in me is feeling this way. So it's not all of you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the thing about that something is, as you say, is having compassion toward it, because it's trying to take care of you. It's worried. It's worried about bad things happening to you, and it wants to stop that. So so to have compassion to it is to step away and be separate from it. It's not all of you, and say, it wants to be heard, though. So really to listen to it and then acknowledge that, yeah, I hear what you're saying. You're telling me I messed up on this because you're worried about bad things happening. I hear you. And that also puts you in a position of not having to agree with it, saying, this isn't helpful. But if you're battling it and just trying to shut that voice up, I have not found that works successfully, but I have found that creating that space between you and it, and this is not, this is like yelling at the toddler for running in the street. It wants to prevent bad things happening, but in this case, I hear you, you're worried, and I'm on top of it.
It is. It's when we can, I really over-identify with, something that happened in labor, and it's a normal part of brain functioning to focus on that negativity bias and looking for the worst case scenario, or the worst things that happened, or the things that stick in our mind, and we don't remember if there were good things that happened, or they don't stand out as much. But being able to not identify with that feeling of failure, or that can be so like soul crushing for a new mom who's just figuring out this new identity and her body, and there's so much happening, to be carrying that baggage into that postpartum. That, no, I don't mean
Yeah.
baggage in it, but I mean carrying that weight really of self-blame, really, rather than the events, but the self-blame or self-criticism into postpartum. I think, again, as you mentioned earlier, the role of the doula there to help mom feel heard,
Yeah.
and if helpful, to look for the positives as well, and but not to minimize her experience, and just because it's so important for women to feel heard. I think
Yeah.
years and years of women say, I just wanted someone to hear me out, and tell
Mhm.
my
But
story,
those
and
various
feel
parts of you feel
heard.
the same way. They want to feel heard too. So there's the whole you
Yeah.
that understands, like, to have someone just be a listening ear in that compassionate space. But you can actually do that for the parts of yourself.
Yes.
This
Yeah.
I absolutely have gotten this from this course that I've taken, and that was transformational for my inner critic.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I could talk for days about our inner critics, and how we can make them a little bit nicer, and realize that they do fulfill a purpose, but we don't always have to believe what they tell us.
Right. To have compassion, to hear them out, to be present with them without fear, just to be present and listen. And then, but that's not all of me. That's just a part of me
Yes.
that wants to be helpful, but
Yeah.
isn't being.
Yeah. And it's, again, but we have a brain that, parts of our brain that haven't changed since, our cave dwelling days are now trying to cope with this digital world. So we have a mismatch between, our evolutionary development of our emotions and what they were designed for, and what we're faced with today. And yeah, I think I feel compassion is, as I'll mention in many of my videos, compassion training, I think, as part of birth preparation, I think could be just a game changer for new parents, after they've kind of crossed the bridge into being brand new parents.
I'll tell you something that just helped me on my down days when I felt like I wasn't the mother I really wanted to be. And that was that from your baby and child's point of view, pretty much up until they get to be teenagers, you're the only mother they know. So whatever it is, you're okay by them, because they're not comparing you to anybody else. They don't know any different.
I don't know.
And the other thing
until
is,
they come home and they say, "Well, I got pizza on Friday night."
Yeah, that's not until they get older that you're going to get that. But at that point, you're probably not going to be quite as worried about, how you're doing.
No.
And there was something else. Oh, shoot, it got away from me. Oh, if you're a perfect parent, think how stressful it would be if you were perfect. Can you imagine growing up and experiencing your own, like difficulties and imperfections, and having perfect parents? So you're actually doing your child a favor by screwing up sometimes,
Yeah.
And keep
Welcome
your sense
to planet
of humor.
Earth. This is what humans do, and get used to it. We mess up. This is the price of being a human. And see, I know I've taken a lot of your time already today, and I am so appreciative of your insights and wisdom, and for taking the time to share it with me, and for our viewers very soon, once we are live online. Would you please just tell people where we can find your website and where we can find your books?
So I am HenciGoer.com. The book is Labor Pain, What's Your Best Strategy? And that's available on Amazon and other venues. Amazon's the big one, but if you don't like Amazon, it is available elsewhere. And I'm also on Facebook and Instagram under Take Charge of Your Birth. And if you sign up for my newsletter, which I know you can do on my website, if you subscribe to my newsletter, then you'll get a monthly informational newsletter.
Right.
So I can't think of anything else. Nope. I think that's about covers it as to how to get in touch with me. And of course, you
Thank
can
you,
comment on anything on Facebook or Instagram, or you can write me at henci@hencigoer.com.
Yeah, and I can attest for NC is very, very great at answering questions on research and a very responsive on all things kind of.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, check out. I have a blog post that's on henci.goer.com that might have information that would be really helpful to your viewers.
And I'll include everything, all of your links in and social media in the show notes.
Thank you.
Thank you again, NC. I hope you have a restful weekend. And I look forward to talking to you before your next book on induction launches. I think that is going to be an episode and a half. We'll have to carve out 2 hours for that one. There's lots to talk about. But I look forward to talking to you about that whenever we get a date in the schedule.
Probably sometime in 2024. Thank you so much for having me. It's really been fun talking to you and to your viewers.
Thank you, NC.
Thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode. Remember, empowerment begins with knowledge. If you enjoyed our time together and want more content like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with your friends. Stay inspired, stay informed, and until next time, take care of yourself.